So welcome everybody. First, welcome to Cornerstone tonight. This is going to be a super interesting night. I told Jennifer our goal in this was to not make it like going to your grandmother's house to watch a slideshow from a vacation.
We're going to try to keep it interesting.
So that's the plan anyway. So, we're going to have some snacks here in a minute. We'll talk about that. But let me kind of just give you an overview of tonight. We're going to talk about how a trip to the Holy Land works. We're going to go over some basic history of Israel. And so Israel's a complicated place, the Holy Land. And so we'll try to help you understand how we got from the time of Jesus to now. We'll go over some of the geography. It's an amazing place. It's small, but it's very, as you go through Israel, it changes drastically depending on where you're at. We'll go through some pictures from the trip, and we'll share some resources so you can kind of do some more study. And somewhere here close to the beginning, we're going to take a break and do some snacks. Jenny has done an amazing job as always trying to...
I tried to do some Israeli food, so I'll kind of tell you when we get to some pictures. I'll kind of tell you what that is. So don't feel bad if you don't want to try it. It's okay. We also have cookies from Subway and some ice cream, so you'll be okay. So don't feel pressure. But and mine's not as good as the authentic stuff. So if you go to Israel, don't say, "Oh wow, Jenny's was not as good as this."
It's a little hard finding ingredients.
It is.
Here.
It's a little hard to find exactly the things they use, the cheeses and certain things, but we tried to do the best we could.
So we'll kind of jump right in and talk about just how a trip works. And some of you may already know this, some of you, this may be a whole new thing, but typically when you go to Israel, the Holy Land, you'll go with a tour company. We went with a church from Abingdon. A pastor friend of mine had a trip planned right in March of 2020. So guess what happened? And they had like 50 people scheduled to go, and they only could get like 20-some this time to go when they rescheduled it. So they had some extra spots. He messaged me and said, "Hey, we would love for you guys to join us." And so we went with them, and it was a great group. They worked with a tour company called Select Tours International. One of the interesting things about a trip like this, though, Israel requires by law that you have a local tour guide with your group the whole time you're there.
If you have more than 7 people.
Yeah, 7 people, I think.
Take just your family, but you would want a tour guide, I'm telling you.
Yeah. And to be a tour guide there, you have to go through a 2-year process. It's intense. They have to know an amazing amount of history. Our tour guide had 2 master's degrees, comparative religions and political science. He was Christian, but he was also Palestinian. He was also an Israeli citizen. So very unique combination. He was Arab, Christian, Palestinian, and he gave us a lot of unique perspectives on the trip. But he could rattle off the dates to anything that happened in any place we were. He knew the Muslim history, the Jewish history, the Christian history, and just like it was incredible.
I don't know enough history to know if he was correct, but he sounded like he knew what he was talking about. It makes you really wish you would have paid attention. I took a Western Civ class in college, and I really wish I would have made better than a B- in that class, because it really would have been helpful at that point. But.
Yeah. But it was amazing just to have someone with you. And then in our group, there was a dentist on our trip from Castlewood, Virginia. So we had some people from Abingdon and some people from Lebanon and far southwest Virginia. So it was a hoot. I'm just telling you, you get people from backwoods Virginia and going anywhere international, it's fun. But the dentist, he had been to Israel 13 times. Absolutely, he had an amazing knowledge too of everywhere and archaeology, and so we had our own tour guide too. So it was interesting where we, especially
at night, he would take us on a unofficial tour. We would come back to the hotel, eat dinner, and he's like, "Anybody wants to go? Be in the lobby at 7," and we'd go back out, and he would take us around. So that was always fun. As
soon as you get there to Israel, you meet up with your tour guide in the airport. They pick you up in a tour bus, and it's amazing how the whole week works. We went for a 12-day trip. They take you to your hotels. They provide breakfast and supper every day. Some lunches are provided. Some lunches you're on your own. And the tour bus takes you where you need to be. They pay all your fees. Everything's kind of handled for you. We did do a lot of walking. I think I told some of you guys, or if you saw my post on Facebook, we added up, we walked over 50 miles for the 12 days we were there. I think the most we walked in a day was around 8 miles in one day.
So when you see all this food that we ate, it's okay because you walk 5 miles a day, so you can justify it.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it is a lot of walking.
And we did have a little bit of a younger group, so that's part of why we did a little more walking. The average age of someone from the U.S. that goes to Israel is 62. Wow. So I thought that was interesting.
I think it's mainly because that's when you're financially free and free from your job or your responsibilities enough to be able to go. So it usually takes that long before people go. So yeah. I would encourage you, if you're younger than 64, would you say? 62. Then try to go before that, just because I think if the sooner you go, the more you can soak in and come back and share and kind of apply to your life. So I just encourage you to think about it.
Yeah. And it was also Ramadan while we were there, so the roads were shut down some, so we had to walk more because of that. So it was just kind of a interesting time. I mentioned how meals work. They fed us good, so everything was a lot of buffets, but the food was excellent the whole week. Lodging, we stayed in the Sea of Galilee for 4 or 5 days, and then the Dead Sea for a day, and then the rest of the time we spent in Jerusalem. And kind of, Israel's small enough you can drive around. So it's
about the size of New Jersey, the entire country. So it's not a very big.
It's about 45 miles wide, and then if you take out the desert at the bottom, which is pretty much uninhabitable, the rest of it is 150 miles north to south. So it's not big. So that's a little bit about how the trip works. I'll show you a picture. There's a picture of the airplane. That was the most challenging thing. I'll just tell you, if you've not flown across the ocean on a big plane, that's probably, I think it was probably one of the toughest things.
It's about a 12-and-a-half-hour flight. So sitting still for that long is a little rough. That's just a little bit of a... I guess it depends. I don't like to sit still, and you're pretty cramped. I mean, it's a small. You're in those little.
There's
seats.
10 seats across, so it's a big plane. Anyway, I thought.
And they make you walk past the first class pods. Where everybody's got their feet up and their little blankets. But
Yeah.
We were not in first class, as you can see.
Yeah. So let me give you some history of Israel real quick. This is super fast, but I think it's important just to kind of understand how we got from the time of the Bible to today. And so after Jesus died, buried, crucified, he rose from the dead. After that, about 30 years later, the Jewish people revolted against the Roman rule. In the year 70 A.D., we see the temple was destroyed by the Romans. We see them destroy pretty much Jerusalem. We see them ransack most of the locations, churches, areas there that had already been established. And we see, Acts chapter 8 talks about how the believers were scattered. And so that's kind of when this started happening. And this is when it talks about in the Bible, Saul was persecuting Christians and Stephen was martyred, and all that's going on right about started around 70. 73 was when the Jewish people were finally defeated at Masada, and that's a big deal to them. Masada is one of Herod's palaces near the Dead Sea, and we'll have some pictures from there that you'll see. But that's a kind of a holiday that they remember and look at and kind of go back to. The next big time period that's important to look at is started in the year 313, the Byzantine Empire. This is where the Emperor Constantine, Roman emperor, converted to Christianity. And if you know much about, if you've ever read, this is when kind of the start of what I would say the Roman Catholic Church as as kind of as you know it today, where the Roman government and the church kind of combined. What's interesting about the Byzantine Empire, though, is that Constantine's mother, Helena, went to Israel and marked the spots where everything happened, and established churches. So in the year 325, she went to Israel and marked, okay, this is where Jesus was born. This is where he was crucified. And so they established churches there.
And that's important, I guess, when you go there, because then you realize how this happened. Like when you say this is a church that was built on this site, you're like, well, who decided it was that site? That's why that was so important that she did that, because she would ask, hey, where was Jesus born when she went? And it had only been 300 years. So you think if something significant happened here in Galax 300 years ago, we would know that spot still. It had been passed down. Like my mom would have told me, and I would have told my kids, and it would have been like, oh, that's the place that whatever that event happened. So it was close enough to the time that these sites mostly are fairly accurate to a certain degree of where these things really happen. That was important for me because I didn't know. I'm like, how do they know this? That's been so long. It's been built over and built over and built over. So, but that's, to me, practically, that's why that's really important.
The Church of the Nativity in Bethlehem, it was one of those churches. It was actually finished in 333, and it's the oldest active church in the world. It's never been destroyed. It's been built onto several times and renovated, and they had a fire one time. They had rebuilt part of it, but there's parts of the original church there from the year. We think something's old in the United States when it's 200 years old, and you start talking about, 2,000 years. Wow, it's crazy. So that's the Byzantine Empire. If you read about in history, the Arab rule in 636, the Arab took over, and many of the locations were destroyed. The Church of the Nativity was one that wasn't, because they actually hold Mary in high esteem, and the Muslim faith as well, so they didn't do anything there. 1099, the Crusaders came in, and so surprisingly in Israel you'll see lots of statues of knights in armor. The Crusaders came in and kind of retook Israel and Jerusalem and rebuilt churches. And so the churches that had been destroyed, they were rebuilt during the time of the Crusaders. 1291, the Mamluk rule, that's when India, Iraq area, they came in, took over. 1517, the Ottoman Empire, that's from Turkey, they came in. 1918 is when the British took over. I share all this just to say this land has changed hands back and forth throughout history. And it goes from, Jewish to Muslim, back to the Jewish to Muslim. It's just, back to even Christian during the Crusaders. So this was, things have really, you just see a lot of change in the whole area. In 1948, Israel was established as kind of the nation state we know it is today. It was like, I think on May 14th, 1948, the next day they were invaded by 5 Arab nations. And so that war went for about a year, and Israel won, so to speak, and they had an armistice, and that's kind of the nation kind of was established. In 1967, Syria, Egypt, and Jordan invaded them again in what we now know is the Six-Day War. They invaded, and in 6 days the war was over. Israel won, and that's when Israel took control of the West Bank area, the Gaza Strip, the Golan Heights. And so I just mentioned that because if you watch the news, you'll see some information about occupied territories or contested states, and that's what it's talking about. It's these areas that Israel has control of. They're predominantly Muslim, and yet it's a complicated region, very complicated. And we'll talk about that a little more when we show some pictures from the West Bank. But that kind of brings us to today, and that's your 5-minute history lesson. So that's quick, but that kind of shows you kind of what's happened a little bit. I'll talk a little bit about the geography. Here's a map. See if I can see it better this way. And so Israel, the bottom part of it, that sliver is the desert. And so not much happens there. You can see the Dead Sea right below Jerusalem. The West Bank area, again, is that occupied territory that's mostly Muslim, but the state of Israel does have control over. The Gaza Strip next to Egypt. To the north, you have Lebanon and Syria, and that's where the Golan Heights are. The Sea of Galilee is kind of right above the West Bank area there. The Jordan River kind of runs vertically. In the next slide, I think you'll see the geography a little bit better. And so I'll explain. I'm going to walk over to the map. I don't know how many of y'all on the other side, just you'll kind of, you have, Israel's an interesting country. You have coastal plains against the Mediterranean Sea. Beautiful land, nice farmland, incredible. Then you have the central mountains, and mountains go up pretty steep. I mean, they're big mountains. Then on the other side of that, you have the Jordan Rift Valley. This goes all the way down into Africa. It's the lowest place on earth. The Dead Sea is around negative 1,400 feet below sea level. The Sea of
Our
Galilee.
tour guide, when he would say lowest place on earth, would always say geographically, not morally.
Yeah.
Just so you know, that's what they meant.
The Sea of Galilee is 700 feet below sea level. I didn't realize that. But the whole Jordan River is below sea level. It's a sunken down valley. On the other side of that is the country Jordan, and there's mountains on that side. You have right below the Sea of Galilee, you have the Jezreel Valley, which is another beautiful valley, very important for trade, that a lot of people walk through. Then you had Lower Galilee and you had Upper Galilee. Upper Galilee kind of reminded me of around here. Very beautiful. You'll see some pictures of that. Lower Galilee was very tropical. That's kind of the below Jerusalem you have the Judean wilderness. You'll see some pictures of that. It's desolate, but kind of mountains. And then below that you have the desert, and it is a desert. And so it's pretty, there's a lot of variation in Israel. But I just show you that a little bit just to kind of give you a heads up as you see the pictures. And my hope is that you'll go back and when you read the Bible and you'll see like a city mentioned, you'll go, wait a minute, where is that? You know, because let's just be honest, how many people, when we read through those long lists of cities, even if it's talking about the Canaanites, the Philistines in the Old Testament, I mean, how many of us just read through it and say, oh yeah. How many times do we stop and say, now where is that? And what did these people do? And were they farmers or were they shepherds? And, you know, it's kind of, I think that's one of the things I took away from this is kind of the backstory on everything. The population real quick. If you exclude the West Bank, Israel's around 10 million people. It's 73% Jewish, 25% Muslim, less than 2% Christian. And when we say Christian, you guys think about Protestant churches, right? I mean, that's when you go there and you say Christian, you're talking Orthodox Church and the Catholic Church. You don't really see Protestant there much at all. There's a few there. There's actually, Baptist is probably the largest Protestant denomination there, but it's mostly Greek Orthodox and Catholic, and there's several different variations of Catholic that are there. In the West Bank, it's 85% Muslim and less than 1.5% Christian. And when we were in Bethlehem talking to some of the Christians there, they were saying everybody's trying to get out right now. The Christians are leaving. He said there will be no Christians left in Bethlehem soon.
And that's really something you can pray for is those Christians in the West Bank, in Bethlehem and Jericho, because they are so few, and they are trying to get out because since COVID, the poverty has been terrible because tourism is their main livelihood, and it stopped for almost 2 years. So that really, it took a hit there because in Israel, it's a lot like here. They helped, they supported people. There were stimulus checks, things like that. In the West Bank, nothing. People starved to death. It was terrible. So just pray for the Christians there because they're trying to get out. The poverty's bad. And when they leave, I mean, there will be very little, resource for anybody to go in there to visit these sites of where Jesus was born and Jericho and things like that because there will be no Christians there to maintain it or to even allow people to come in. So that's just a big prayer request.
So, we're going to talk about the food, and then we'll have some snacks, and then we'll come back in and jump into the slideshow.
That sounds
so
good.
The food, I just simply said, that was all I put. It was incredible. When I go places, I plan my trip around what to eat, and I was a little worried.
He doesn't like olives. He's like, I don't like olives. Is that going to be okay? And it was fine. There was plenty to eat besides. There are a lot of olives, but Do you have a video?
I do.
Okay.
I just took all the pictures. I took a lot of pictures of food.
So it's a couple-minute video. I'll just let you play that, and I'll tell you what I've got over here, just so you can be looking for it there. One of my favorite things is they're called baruckas, and they're like a puff pastry with cheese in the middle with sesame seeds on top. So you'll see those over there. So I made those, and every morning I ate at least 2 of those. Like I said, we walked 5 miles, so it was okay. But so those were like breakfast. They eat those for breakfast. Sometimes they slice them and take a boiled egg and slice it and put inside of it, kind of make a sandwich with it, or just eat them. So you'll see that breakfast was always a lot of hummus and vegetables at breakfast. Also, they eat vegetables at breakfast, where we normally don't do that. Obviously, there's no bacon, no pork anywhere, because Jewish people, Muslim people, no one eats it there. So there's no bacon. But and then also over there, I have something called shawarma, and that is a Middle Eastern dish that they eat in that whole region, not just Israel, but all throughout. And it's very similar to a gyro. If you've eaten a Greek gyro, it's very similar. They cook the meat on like a spit that's up and down. They put lamb fat on top, and it's chicken and turkey usually. The lamb fat drips down, and it's wonderful. The way it cooks, and then they shave it. And I think you've got a video of a guy. They have this little machine that like shaves it off. Put it in a pita with vegetables, usually cucumbers, tomatoes, pickles, and then there's a couple sauces on that. So I've just got little small ones for you to try over there, little tiny shawarma. The real shawarmas were huge. So I have that. I've also got hummus because, like I said, hummus was breakfast, lunch, and dinner. They serve it a little different. They usually swirl it kind of on a plate and put olive oil in the middle. So I tried to do that, but mine's not very pretty. I had some pita chips over there. We had, when we would go to, a lot of the places we went were national park sites, Israeli national parks. And so they had little stores just like they do here, and they would have ice cream freezers, and they had Magnum bars. Y'all ever eaten Magnum bars? I know we eat those here, but that was like a big deal over there. Everybody loves them. Israeli people like them, Americans like them, so I brought some Magnum bars in case you don't like shawarma. Also, there's some olives over there. If you don't like olives, at least try. They're Kalamata, which maybe you've eaten those before. They're different than green olives. So there's olives. There's a tomato and cucumber salad that's like an Israeli thing. So there's that over there. I think that's it.
I think so.
And some Subway cookies, which you won't see on here.
Okay, so here's the video. What I did with all the pictures today, I just threw them in a little video editing program I had, and it kind of did them for me, so we didn't have to flip through each one. So they'll have some music here too, just to get to kind of you'll. So that's the food.
Yeah, so we'll take just a really quick break, and you're welcome to bring your food back here, so we don't want to waste too much time, so you're welcome to bring it back here and eat while we finish the presentation. That'll keep you occupied too. But we've got some little plates out there, just help yourself, and then just, like I said, come on back over here as soon as you get your food, and we'll just continue. And feel free to get up and go get more, or go to the bathroom, or whatever you need to, because we're not going to take another break after this.
Yeah,
and if you're not familiar with Cornerstone, the bathrooms are right behind you back there.
And we do have some things up here too, a map, some books, and some other things here if you want to take a look.
Yeah, if you want to come look at these, you're welcome to flip through the books and look at that.
So we'll reconvene in just a few minutes.
So I think how we're going to do this is Mike's made like short videos, kind of like he did with the food, like 2 minutes long or so, of just like our pictures. And before the picture, video, I'm going to just kind of tell you what you're going to see so that you know what you're looking at. And then afterwards, we can answer questions if you have questions about the pictures, or we can just kind of give another quick overview of maybe some things that, as we're watching, we think of. So, but anytime you need to ask a question, go ahead. This is informal. So if you think of something when you see a picture and want to know what it is, just ask. So the first one's Bethlehem. The first pictures you're going to see are some wood carvings. I do have some up here if y'all want to look. There's kind of a silhouette of Mary, Joseph, and baby Jesus, and then some Jerusalem crosses, and those are made out of olive wood. So that's a craft there. And we went to this store that had these incredible carvings out of olive wood. So you're going to see that, and like I said, they're beautiful. Some of the ones that don't have price tags on, you just don't ask, because, I mean, it was crazy, talented woodworkers that do
Some
that.
of the small ones were like 3,000 to 5,000. I saw one for 8,000. That was pretty small.
Yeah, that are fairly small. So some of these huge ones that you're seeing, I mean, some are probably pushing $1 million. I mean, they are incredible. So, of course, Bethlehem is Jesus' birthplace. You're going to see the Church of the Nativity, which is an Orthodox church, and that's the one Mike was saying has never been destroyed. In my opinion, it's very tacky. It looks like somebody's tacky Christmas decorations because there's a lot of things hanging, and since it's Orthodox, there's a lot of gold, it's just kind of tacky.
A lot of incense. They use a lot of incense. So
Right, so they burn incense, and something interesting about this church is it's really pretty now because it's very clean, but some of the Orthodox churches, there's a lot of smoke from the incense that's burned. This one, they did a multi-million-dollar renovation cleaning project during COVID. It started before COVID, but then since COVID happened, they were able to do it because nobody was visiting the churches. So they brought people in. They took some of the mosaics down piece by piece, like tiny piece by piece, cleaned them and put them back up. So this church was, like I said, it's tacky, but it's beautiful in its own way, but it's kind of a different style. You'll see the cave at underneath that church. So the church at the top is kind of the tacky part. Underneath there's a cave. They've kind of tackied it up too. There's curtains, there's baubles hanging, all that stuff, but that's the cave where Jesus was born. There's lots of gold there too. And then you're going to see a picture of modern Bethlehem from like an overlook. So you'll see that. And then you'll also see the shepherd's field. We really like that. There's a sweet little church there dedicated to the shepherds. You'll see an angel. They've got Gabriel out on an angel, out on the front of the church where the angel came and told the shepherds where the baby Jesus was. So that's really pretty. We like that. Much more peaceful and calm than the Church of the Nativity, which seemed kind of busy. So anyway, I think that's...
I'll mention that Bethlehem is in the West Bank area, so we did have to kind of cross through from Jerusalem into the West Bank there. It's mostly Muslim now, as we mentioned. At the time of Jesus, it was less than 1,000 people lived there. It's a small place. It's also the birthplace of David in Scripture. And all these places, and we kind of alluded to this, most of these locations were marked in, around the year 300. They're the presumed locations, and there's some places that I think they just made up, and we'll kind of tell those. I think this is actually pretty legitimate where this one's at. Some of the other places you can think they just like, oh, this looks like a good place here, we'll say.
And as you look at this and think about that's where Jesus was born, it's very different than the stable, I think, that we have in our nativities in our homes. I mean, it's a cave. So it's different. You can see, like I said, there's a lot of curtains and things hanging in that cave, but there's also, you can see the cave too, like they've left some of that exposed. So.
Okay. and talk about any questions from Bethlehem before we go on to Nazareth. But
I will say I forgot to mention, I had it in my notes, but that last cave that you saw, the one that wasn't so fancy, that was at the shepherd's field. And they think that the shepherds used to take the sheep in there to protect them at night, or that maybe that's where they would go sleep. So.
Dave asked me, there were several pictures of a hole pattern on one of the columns there. And just throughout the centuries, people have made the cross of the sign of the cross there and put their hands there to pray. And so it's just that's been something that's been done for centuries there.
They said the Crusaders would do that. They would put their fingers in those holes before they would go out to battle.
Yeah, they would kneel down and put their fingers in it and pray before they would go off to battle. And another interesting thing, you had to kneel down to go into it. They had a low door. The Crusaders had opened the door up really big so they could ride their horses in there. And they actually brought horses into the church.
And so after they left, they had to lower that door because animals were still coming in, and the door was so big that everything could come in. So that's why you have to dip down really low now, so to keep the animals out.
So all sorts of interesting stuff there.
Any other questions before we move on? We're going to do Nazareth next. So I think you've kind of got a progression of, Bethlehem to Nazareth for Jesus' life. So if anybody's got questions about Bethlehem, we'll do that.
In that order, like to Bethlehem?
We didn't. We kind of went to the Galilee region first and then kind of circled around. But I thought it'd make more sense going through the life of Jesus kind of. Okay, Nazareth.
All right. So Nazareth, you're going to see the Church of the Annunciation, which was that probably is the first church we went to, because Nazareth is up near Galilee. It's in that region. So the Church of the Annunciation, which is where Mary received word from the angel that she would have the Savior.
And I think this is a made-up church.
We do think this was it's a very Catholic thing that was probably more tradition than it was historical fact. So, the Church of the Annunciation, it was still pretty. They had Marys from all over the world. When this church was built, I don't know when it was built, you may remember, but when it was built, they had different countries send their interpretation of Mary. So it's really neat to see these paintings and murals of Mary based on the country. I mean, the Ethiopian Mary looks very different than the United States Mary. So it was really kind of cool to see that. You'll also see a picture of our whole group. We took a picture there on the steps at one of the convents. We met a little lady. You're going to see her. She was 94 years old. Her name was Sister Margaret. She was from Ireland, and she had been a nun her whole life. And this was her final assignment, is to come to Nazareth. It's called the Sisters of Nazareth. So that's where she was, at this convent. And she took us on a tour down all these stairs. And she's 94 years old, and she's about 4'10", and she was wonderful. So you'll see Sister Margaret. You'll also see the first century house that she took us down to see. So when they started building this this convent there, as they built that, that's what happens over there all the time. They start to build something and they're like, oh wow, we're on top of a first century city or whatever. So as they were excavating for that, you're going to see a first century house that's underneath this convent that they think could have been where Mary, Joseph, and baby Jesus, child Jesus lived in Nazareth. There's also a tomb there that would have been a first century tomb, obviously not the tomb Jesus was in, but possibly, they say it could have possibly been Joseph, Jesus' father's tomb, but there's really no way to know that either.
The reason they think it's maybe related to the family of Jesus is a third century church was built there. And they said that was kind of unique, being a church on top of a house, on top of it. And so they don't know, but they...
Right. There's some significance to this first century house that probably had to do with Jesus' family, because Jesus grew up in Nazareth, obviously. Then you'll see a picture of our guide, Khalil. He was from Nazareth, he lived in Nazareth, so that's where he made his home. His wife owned a restaurant there, so you'll see a picture of him. And then also Mount Precipice, which is where Jesus, when he was ran out of Nazareth, when they tried to make him leave and they were going to throw him over the cliff, that was Mount Precipice. And that is not 100% that's where that happened, but it could have. But you get a really pretty view of the city of modern-day Nazareth from there. So that's kind of how the video ends.
So a couple more things. The town was known for its stonemasons, which is interesting. When you look in Scripture, the word that we translate as carpenter for the family of, for Joseph and Jesus, it's the real meaning of the word is a builder. Well, they don't use trees in Nazareth. There are very few trees. The trees they do use are fruit trees. They don't build things out of trees. They build things out of stone. So Nazareth was famous for stonemasons. It's even talked about in extra biblical literature. So our guides, like everybody here, knows Jesus and Joseph, they weren't carpenters, they were stonemasons. So interesting, sometimes the things you learn. And it is predominantly Muslim today. So, okay.
Any questions about Nazareth?
Yeah. Was that first tree that looked ancient, was that an olive tree?
I can't remember the picture, but there were probably, more than likely, yes, because there were olive trees everywhere.
When we've got the pictures from the Garden of Gethsemane, you're going to see some olive trees that were probably 2,000 years old that Jesus really could have been in that olive grove, because they live a really long time, because if they're cut down or damaged, they sprout and grow. So yeah, probably there were tons of olive trees. Tons of olive trees. They weren't, they just had teeny tiny olives on them when we were there, because it's not the time of year for olives yet. But you could see them. I mean, they were just like, teeny tiny little green balls. But yeah.
Something you'll notice in both Bethlehem and Nazareth is they're on hillsides. They don't build cities on flat land in Israel. The land's too valuable. So they only build on mountains.
That section, yeah, and we had, I'll kind of tell you why we've got some of these pictures like that, and even the one of Sister Margaret up close. We had a guy go with us. He and his wife are from Alaska, and his hobby, which is, I mean, he's very good, is photography. He even has like a travel photography business or site, or he's been in a lot of travel logs and things like that. So he took a lot of pictures of flowers because he liked them. And yeah, there were.
So I used some of his pictures.
So he sent us all his pictures. So we do have a few of those. So some of the ones that look really professional. Mike's good, but this guy's really good. So there's some really nice. Yes, but he did take a lot of really pretty pictures of flowers. So, especially in the Upper Galilee and the Sea of Galilee area, and even Nazareth, which is closer. There's a lot of flowers. Once you get to the desert, you'll see in a few minutes it's totally different. Anybody else? The what?
The stone.
Oh, yeah, it is. Yeah.
Yeah, the churches are very ornate, incredible.
This church, you can tell the difference between the Catholic Church and the Orthodox Church. The church at Nazareth was the real fancy gold.
Or Bethlehem.
I'm sorry,
Yeah.
Bethlehem. The one at Nazareth, you could tell was a Catholic church.
And that church, too, had been it's hard to explain, but there was multiple centuries of different churches they've been built around. So at the bottom level, there's a stone church from they think 3rd, 4th century. Then you have your newer church that was around the Crusader time. Then you have the current church on top of that. So it's just like peeling back layers of an onion as you go through.
You think about the labor involved with all that stonework.
Yeah. Well, wait till you see some of the stuff that Herod did.
It's incredible.
Herod
Marble from Italy, things like that were brought in, slabs. Like, I don't know how they would do it today, much less how they did it then. It's amazing.
There was one stone in the wall underneath the western wall.
We have a picture of it.
Yeah, but it was the stone. It's the largest building stone that they've ever discovered anywhere in the world. But it's over 50 feet long, 11 feet tall, 6 feet deep. They estimate it weighs 600 tons. And Herod used it to build that wall. Now, how in the world did they move something that big? That's bigger than any stone in the pyramids or anything. I don't.
It's crazy.
I have no idea. So.
Maybe so.
Okay, so.
So this is Mount Arbel, and that was the very first place we went. The first day we were there, we first got there, we went straight to our hotel. But this was the first, hike we did to the top of Mount Arbel. It overlooks the Sea of Galilee, so that's what you're mostly going to see is from up there. It was absolutely breathtaking. It was beautiful. Lots of flowers on the way up, so I think there's maybe a few pictures of that. I think what was most, hit us so quickly to be there, this is your first thing you're seeing, is looking at the Sea of Galilee and the little sliver where Jesus did 85% of his ministry. 85% of what he did was done in this little 2-mile square around the Sea of Galilee. There's a lot of tropical flowers, things like that. There's a lot of agriculture there. So when you're up on top, you're going to look down. You're going to see what we were looking at. There's lots of fields, and there's some brown, canopy type looking things that cover the banana trees. There's so many banana trees and date palms. But the banana trees have this mesh covering to keep the birds out. I guess the birds try to eat the bananas. So you'll see that. There's also a picture of a mountain, Mount Hermon, that's in the background. It's about 9,000 feet elevation, and there's snow still on it. So you'll actually see that too.
And we mentioned our guide has the opinion that this is where Jesus brought the disciples to give them the Great Commission.
Which would make sense because you can see trade routes and all these things where he would have said, go into all the world and spread the gospel, from that point, because they would have been able to see what they were supposed to do.
And this was more of a natural park, nothing built. It was so I think that's another thing that we liked about it. Galilee now.
All right. So Galilee, the first picture you're going to see is a sunrise from our hotel. So where we stayed the first 4 nights was on the Sea of Galilee, like literally like right on it. Like you could walk just a few steps out to the Sea
We
of Galilee.
stayed in Tiberias.
Yes, and right on the Sea of Galilee. So that's the sunrise. The sun rose right over the Sea of Galilee, so it was really pretty. And since our time was a little wonky, we were up early. So you're also going to see a boat ride that we took on the Sea of Galilee. They have boats that kind of look like, I guess, old boats that they do tours on. So we did that. You're going to see Tiberias. That's this. You'll kind of see like an overlook of Tiberias, which is the city we stayed in. You'll see Capernaum, which we went there, and of course that's where Peter was from. And you're going to see that's where Jesus called the the fishermen, where he called Andrew,
Peter,
James, and
John,
John,
and Matthew.
and also Matthew, because he was a tax collector. So we went to Capernaum. You'll see Peter's mother-in-law house. It's this weird, what did you call it? The Jesus?
Spaceship Jesus.
Spaceship Jesus is what Mike called it. It does look like a spaceship because it's kind of modern, but the floor is glass, and underneath it, you'll see that it's Peter's mother-in-law's house, supposedly, which is probably where Peter lived. You'll see a statue of Peter. You'll see an old synagogue. There's lots of plants and aloe and succulents, some kind of odd-looking plants right there on the Sea of Galilee. Then we went to a place they called it the Jesus boat, and it's an excavated boat that they found not very long ago. So you'll see some pictures of that they pulled out of the Sea of Galilee that Jesus could have ridden on.
It's actually a boat from the first century that was
it's
preserved in the mud.
It's a pretty crazy story. You can look that up on YouTube sometime to see how they preserved this boat and got it out. But it was pretty cool. So they have a museum built to that. Then you'll see Magdala, which was probably one of my favorite places. You'll see a scroll table there at the synagogue. There's an old synagogue at Magdala, which who knows who you think might be from Magdala. Mary Magdalene, right? So there's an old synagogue there that they've excavated just recently as they were building this fancy hotel. They found it, and there's actually a table where they would have unrolled the scroll to read, during their services. So it's very likely Jesus went to this synagogue because it was right on the path of places that he would have gone. Of course, then Mary Magdalene was from there.
It's literally like 2 miles from Capernaum. So.
Yeah. And it's a beautiful little spot. And the whole church, what's really cool about it, it's very new. It's got this water feature, because it's on the Sea of Galilee, it's beautiful, and you'll see pictures of that. But the church is really dedicated to women from the Bible, and there's these pillars all through the church that have different women from the Bible. And then there's one pillar that's blank, and you're supposed to think about a woman who's been a pillar in your life, as you look at that pillar. So it's a really cool place as a female to go and to see. And then at the very end, there's a mural in the basement of that church, and I want you to, afterwards, I'm going to ask you what you think that is. So I won't tell you. I'll let you see.
This one is
I only have a couple.
where the
points.
Sermon on the Mount.
I think this is a fairly short one, but you'll see the Sea of Galilee again. And we went to this area where it's the Church of the Beatitudes, and it's a very well kept area with a convent, as a monastery convent there. It's just beautiful. There's like even picnic shelters that you could rent out and things like that. So it's a really pretty place. Lots of banana trees. You're going to see, like I was talking about the tarps. I think we've got a little bit closer view of that. And then also the Church of the Multiplication. You may want to guess what that is. They have all these names, but it's where Jesus multiplied the fish and the loaves. And there's, I don't think we have a picture of it, but there's lots of murals there. Speaking of the murals, where they would take the tiny tile and make,
The fish and loaves.
The fish and loaves. It's like this kind of little famous mural of the fish and loaves. So
Yeah. And so both of these spots.
Up there, they cheated.
Yeah, I had it up there. Both of these spots, I mean, if they're not the exact location, they're close, right? I mean, because I don't know that the exact location would have been preserved, but the Church of the Beatitudes is beautiful, but they built this whole compound and gardens, and you really can't even, it's almost so much and so built up you can't see. So I actually got a lot of these videos from the parking lot, like looking back behind it where they haven't fixed, so you could actually go down and see the hillside and just think about the people walking up the hill from the Sea of Galilee to listen to Jesus. So I think that I actually had more of a moment in the parking lot than in the church, just looking at it. So.
About Dan and Caesarea Philippi. And Mike loved Caesarea Philippi. I think that was your favorite
Yeah,
place.
I think it was.
So I may let him talk about that. But you'll first see a river at a nature preserve that we went through. There's a lot. Israeli parks, they have a national park service just like we do, and they are beautiful parks. Very well maintained, nice park offices, that kind of thing. So this was actually a nature preserve. There's a really fast-running river, and that's in Dan. So this city of Dan, there's an archaeological dig going on there. So you'll see some pictures from that. There's some other ancient cities under it, kind of like he was talking about the different layers. There's a lot of archaeology going on in Dan. Then Caesarea Philippi is where Jesus took his disciples kind of on a retreat. And you'll see why. It's beautiful. So he took them away, to get them out from the crowds, and took them here. And this is where he asked them, "Who do you say that I am?" When he asked them that. And Peter said, "You are the Christ." And then what did he say? Do you remember? Anybody? I'll give you a quiz. What did Jesus say when he said, "You are the Christ"? He told Peter what? That he's going to build his church on Peter, that he'd be a rock and the gates of hell couldn't prevail against it. So the cool thing about this is you're going to see this huge rock where they used to have some pagan worship that happened, which is really, it's a pagan place. This was not a Christian place. And they called it the gates of hell right there because they would do like sacrifices and things there, and it was just not a nice place. They called it the gates of hell, and it's this huge rock. So it's very cool that that's what Jesus said. The gates of hell won't prevail against you, and I'm going to build my church on you, the rock. And you're looking at this big rock face. So just think about that while you're watching this.
Mm-hmm. I'll mention the city of Dan. Both of these places are right up against Lebanon and Syria. So this is as far north as you can go in Israel. Dan is significant in the Old Testament several times. Jacob goes there to rescue Lot one time. It's where the tribe of Dan ended up, but they weren't supposed to go there. They were supposed to go over on the coast, the Mediterranean, where the Philistines were, but they were afraid of them, so they went north instead. And this is where they ended up. It's also in the divided kingdom, in the northern kingdom, there were two temples to worship. One was in Shiloh, one was in Dan. And so you'll see the temple site in Dan here.
How old is that?
Old.
Like
Old Testament.
Yeah, like Old Testament old. Yeah.
So
really, really old.
And then actually, yeah, they're doing an archaeological dig on a Sumerian city that was there. Like ancient city. So it would have been in Genesis time frame. So. It's interesting. So,
Is that
the,
Qumran?
yes, this is a bunch of places.
Okay, so we've got the desert and the wilderness here. You're going to see a big change from Galilee and like Caesarea Philippi, what you've been seeing, to this new area when we traveled down. And like Mike said, it's not that far. I mean, you're a couple hours in a bus and it completely changes. You're going to see Qumran, which is where the Dead Sea Scrolls were found. And Mike will talk to you all day about that if you want to talk about Dead Sea Scrolls later, because he loved that. But you'll see a couple of little shots of the caves where they actually found the jars with the Dead Sea Scrolls in it. We went to Masada, and that's one of Herod's desert's home. I mean, he built these palaces that were crazy. So this was his palace in the desert. We took a cable car up to it. I don't like heights. I wasn't a fan of that, but I did it. So the other option was to walk.
It's on top of a 1,000-foot cliff.
Yeah.
And they built one of Herod's palaces on top. Overlooking the Dead Sea.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Again, how in the world did they did that? I don't. Mm-hmm. And they did it because you couldn't get to it any other way.
Yeah, I mean, it was protected, obviously. Then you'll also see our guide Khalil at Masada. He's doing a little demonstration, just a short little video of him pouring water into like a model that they've made of how that they actually got water to Masada, because you're in the middle of a desert. So they relied on rain runoff, and they built these, kind of tracks where the rain would come into the city and into the cistern. So it was pretty interesting. Then we went to a place called Engedi. It's a national park, and it's an oasis in the desert. So you're in all this desert, and then you go here, and there's waterfalls, and it's really pretty. So you'll see some pictures of that. I think Mike mentioned in his sermon, this is where David hid from Saul in a cave at Engedi. So you'll actually see, we hiked up and saw the cave. You'll see a hyrax, which is a little varmint of some sort. There's a picture of him in there. We went to Jericho. There's not much of Jericho, but we did see a camel, and I didn't ride the camel. I felt sorry for the camel. It was kind of sad. He had to get up and down for people to get on his back. So, but a couple people did ride the camel. And then if you'll watch right after the camel, you'll see a tree, and it's a sycamore tree. And that is possibly a tree that Zacchaeus could have climbed in, maybe not the tree, but as we drove by, we sang the little song, thinking maybe that's where Zacchaeus was. So
Zacchaeus was in Jericho.
it was in Jericho, and it was a sycamore tree, so maybe not that sycamore tree, but possibly there's a sycamore tree there. So then the next spot we go, we didn't spend a lot of time there. It's just called the Wilderness, and you'll see why. It's just wilderness.
The Judean wilderness, yeah.
Yeah, and that's where Jesus would have gone into the wilderness. And
it's near Jericho. It's on the backside of Jericho. It's also the setting for the story of the Good Samaritan. Several things, other things there too. So it's kind of a neat place.
And when you think I always saw the wilderness as going like into the woods, but this is even more harsh than that. So that's
I think the Dead Sea's in here too.
Maybe.
So there's a bunch in this one.
All right, and also the Jordan River at the very end, I think.
Yeah, and Jordan River, we had a baptism service there near Jericho. So, okay, so there's a lot of here. Okay. Oh, yeah, we got some salt.
We do have some salt crystals. That was, I forgot about the Dead Sea in my notes, but yeah, it was beautiful there. We stayed in a really nice hotel. That was our only one night. I mean, our hotels were very nice, but that one was like a little extra nice. It was on the Dead Sea. It was a resort.
So I don't know if you can see in my hand these salt crystals. That's what you're walking on in the Dead Sea.
The entire bottom is that. So.
There's no sand. It's salt.
And if your kids, if your moms let you touch it and lick your finger, and you'll see how salty it really is. So
the ocean's around 3% salt. The Dead Sea is 33% salt. So it really is, when you get in it, they say everyone floats. It's not, you don't just float. It's hard to stand up. You lean back and your feet just go whoop.
Yeah, you pretty much have
and
to.
And then our guide said, make sure you've got somebody around you to help you get back on your feet. And I laughed, and I couldn't get up one time. I looked like a turtle on its back trying to get up. And I finally holding on to Jenny and trying to get my feet down.
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard to stand up in. It's really strange. And your skin feels like, I don't know, it's super soft. I mean, like when you get out. But they also told us not to stay in more than about 15 minutes without getting out. They have freshwater showers all around. You're supposed to shower because it can really be hard on your skin because there's so much mineral and salt to it. So, yeah, it's a neat experience for sure.
So we're making our way to Jerusalem now, finally. So we're on the tail end. So I don't know how long y'all plan to be here, but the end is in sight. If anyone has to leave,
yes, you won't hurt our feelings.
You won't. No judgment here. If you need to get up, but yeah, we're on to Jerusalem, which is where we kind of end up now.
Yeah, so this is the Mount of Olives, which was a really pretty place. You're going to see the old city of Jerusalem. You can see a view of that. You'll see. We went to a church there that I don't know the name of it, but they had the Lord's Prayer in 163 different languages.
Elione.
What was that?
Elione.
Okay. And like I said, it was really cool because we found the Cherokee one. I think we put that up there. We thought that was interesting. Of course, there's all the other languages. Then there was a teardrop church. You can see the church is shaped like a teardrop, and that's because that was a spot where Jesus wept over the city of Jerusalem when he came up and, said, I wish I could gather you together, and he wept over the city. So it was a small church, but that was a neat little church. You also are going to see several slides of a graveyard that's right there at the Mount of Olives. That's a very interesting thing to see. It's huge.
Hundreds of thousands of graves on Mount of Olives.
Hundreds of graves around Mount of Olives. A lot of people want to be buried there, so it's kind of a.
The going rate is about $300,000 if anybody wants to be buried.
If you want to be buried at the Mount of Olives, it's $300,000. So, yeah, some people spend their life savings to be buried there. So.
In the Jewish tradition, though, they think that if you don't get buried there, you have to crawl underground to get there.
Yeah.
There's a Jewish tradition.
If you thought that, you might pay $300,000. So you'll see that. You'll also see several Muslim temples. You'll see the Temple Mount, I think.
The Dome of the Rock, which is a shrine. That's the big gold covered. It's actually a shrine, not a mosque. But you'll see the Al Aqsa Mosque too. Mm-hmm. You'll see another gold covered thing which is actually a Coptic church. It's a Christian
kind of
church.
One of those almost Russian-looking spiral.
Yeah, that's a Coptic church that you'll see on the Mount of Olives.
Right. And then the Garden of Gethsemane. There's a lot of really old olive trees. That's where you'll see a lot of those. And then the actual garden is fenced off. You can't walk through it. They're trying to protect the trees and the flowers and all that. So you see that. And then the church at Gethsemane was really interesting. The architect that built it, he wanted the outside to look very light and airy and pretty, but then the inside is very dark because he wanted to show Jesus' struggle with flesh and God as he was in the Garden of Gethsemane. I don't want to take this cup. Please take it from me. So that inner struggle is the darkness in the church, but the outside is the light. So that was kind of a neat architectural thing there. So you'll see that too.
Cool. I had several, I would call them God moments on the trip. And surprisingly, there were almost none in churches. They were all mostly in the outdoor places, the places that weren't commercialized. So for me, I don't know, I think that spoke to me more.
When we were at the Church of the Beatitudes and the Sermon on the Mount, we had a little extra time there because of the way things were working. And I sat down with my phone and my Bible and read through the Sermon on the Mount while we were there. So that was really cool to sit and actually read the scripture where it was preached. So that was a neat time.
And something I didn't mention, we did have 4 pastors on this trip. So you can imagine there was everywhere we went, we kind of divvied it up, and we did teaching at every site we went to. So we ahead of time. So we actually, like our group, we would stop in Mount of Olives. We had somebody teach, in Garden of Gethsemane. You know, we actually taught at the different places, and it was short, but it was really good.
That was good.
Where did I teach? You had to ask me that. Caesarea Philippi. I taught there. Where else? It was somewhere else.
I think there was 3.
Yeah.
It's such a whirlwind. I'm telling you,
My
those
mind,
10
yeah.
those 10 days. There's so much. I mean, you're going from 7:30 a.m. to 7:30 p.m. straight, and then crash and do it all over. So it's
I'll
a lot.
remember later, about midnight tonight. I'll tell you.
Yeah, it's a lot to remember.
Oh, we did forget to mention too that glass pitcher came from Jericho.
Yeah,
That was
y'all
in
can
the-
come look at that after. It's hand blown glass. It's called Phoenician glass, and there's crafters in Jericho that do that.
In
It's
Hebron.
in Hebron. So it's Hebron glass is what it's called.
Yeah.
So it's very pretty. You can look on the bottom and see the blow where it's been blown. So, and that's not paint. That's all like silica and minerals and in the glass that make the colors. So it's really pretty.
So the Mount of Olives is where Jesus came into Jerusalem. It's where he's coming back. And you start there, you kind of walk down the hill into the Garden of Gethsemane, and you're making your way into Jerusalem. So that's kind of the significance.
Of Jerusalem, because you saw a little bit of it from the Mount of Olives, but this is down in Jerusalem a little more. So you'll see the Dome of the Rock again, where the temple stood. Now it's a Muslim. So it's not a mosque; it's a shrine. Yeah. Then you'll see the skyline of the city. You'll see our hotel. We actually, the skyline is, you can see Old Jerusalem, New Jerusalem, kind of all together. The actual part of Jerusalem that is not inside the old city walls is very modern, really nice. We walked out a couple nights and got ice cream and stuff. It's, reminds me a lot of being in Washington, D.C. It's just kind of my feel of, the newer part of Jerusalem. And then you'll see the skyline of that from the top of our hotel. A couple pictures of where we stayed there. You'll see the old city wall, and then you'll see the western wall with a lot of Jewish people praying there. The prayers stuck in the wall at the Wailing Wall. So we've got some pictures of that. The southern steps, where probably the Psalms of Ascent were, written for ascending up those steps.
I'd say the southern steps are really impressive because some of the original steps are still there. And those would have been the steps that Jesus sat on, taught, healed, that people walked up, to go on their way to the temple. Some of the street level, we were actually able to go under the western wall and tunnels, and they have excavated down to street level, first century time. So they would have been the same streets Jesus walked on.
Yeah. You'll see the gates into the city. There's, the different gates. You'll see a Jewish bakery, which was wonderfully heavenly smelling when you walk by. And then the tunnel, like he said, there's a place where you can get that they say is the closest to the Holy of Holies. So it's actually they've built this tunnel where you can go. So there's usually people praying there too. And then the really big stone that he talked about, that's the very last slide. I think the one where he said, was, I don't know how big, I'm not good with
Close
that
to
kind
600
of thing.
tons.
Yeah, the big stone that's part of that wall.
Jerusalem has, they call it the Old City. It's surrounded by this massive wall. And that wall is not the original wall. It's built in, the 14th century. But parts of it are. The Western Wall has parts that date back to Herod's time. And so that's why that is such a significant place to the Jewish people. For them, that's the holiest place they can go to. And so you'll see the old city's divided into four quarters. You've got a Jewish quarter, a Christian quarter, a Muslim quarter, and an Armenian quarter. And so, it's just kind of strange. And just, when you get in there and walk around, we walked in all four quarters.
Yeah.
So we were in all four. So, okay. This is kind of, the next slide kind of, did you have something on this you want me to? Okay. This is still in Jerusalem, but it's kind of leading up to the death of Christ. There's a pathway called the Via Dolorosa. Have you heard of that before? There's an old song that some of y'all have heard, I'm sure. It's literally the way of suffering. And it supposedly traces the path to his crucifixion. Historically, it's probably not the correct path. There's several reasons for that, but it's become kind of a pilgrimage. There's multiple stations that you can stop at along the way. There's a church of the flagellation where he was whipped, and there's the different churches and stops along the way. And you'll see a lot of Catholic kind of people doing pilgrimages. And there was people from, I think was that Ethiopia? Or that were like chanting and doing stuff as along the pathway. So this kind of starts on this pathway at the Church of St. Anne and the Bethesda pool that's talked about in Scripture. And then we kind of end up at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. I like the Church of the Resurrection a lot better name, but it's called the Church of the Holy Sepulchre.
I don't think they ask you what to name it.
I know it.
Yeah, it is the.
This is another one of the churches that Helena established, the Constantine's mother, and this is there's two places that claim to be the burial place of Christ: the Garden Tomb and the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Most people think it's the Church of the Holy Sepulchre is the more accurate one.
Which is also Golgotha there. There's a rock where the cross would have been put into the rock.
And what happened, the Garden Tomb, and you'll see that too, in the 1800s, there was someone standing in Jerusalem. They looked out and saw a rock outcropping that looked like a skull, and they said, that's got to be Golgotha. And so they went and bought it and found tombs there, and they're like, this is it. But now they've kind of, looking back, I don't think it is. I think the Church of the Holy Sepulchre is.
We do have some pictures of the Garden Tomb, and it was actually beautiful. It was a lot. To me, it was more meaningful, even though that's not the exact place Jesus was buried. But the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, you'll see that. It's extremely ornate. It was very crowded. We had to stop as these monks came through and did chants and sprayed incense. And it was a very strange experience there for me. So it was almost overwhelming and too much and just, I don't know. It seems very commercialized. And like he said, it needs to be the Church of the Resurrection. It felt like they were worshiping something dead. I mean, it was a very strange thing. So the Garden Tomb, the man that we met there, he was Baptist. He was Baptist, right? And and even though that's probably not where it happened, it was just a much nicer environment, and we had communion there, so it was a nice time to be there. But there's
a rock, and you'll see it on here, a picture at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre where they think Jesus' body was prepared. And so people lay on that rock and rub their clothes on it. And there's a rock there that they think he was whipped on. And so people say you can put your ear to it. And there's a lot of rituals. Just very, very different than what we are accustomed to in church.
It was also the most crowded place we went, which I think we were there only 4 weeks after everything opened back up from COVID. It had only been 4 weeks because it's been closed that long. So I think I don't think we realized while we were there until we got back how blessed we were to be there when there wasn't a crowd, because at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, we maybe waited 45 minutes. He said normally 3 to 4 hours. So it was still very crowded. So, and that church is Orthodox, Catholic. Like there's multiple. It's sections of the church controlled by different denominations or beliefs. So it's a really strange place. But.
nowhere else to stick them. And so these are several of the national parks. Bet Shean is a Roman city that's been heavily excavated. Incredible place. It's mentioned in the Bible one time. When Saul and his men and his sons were killed, they took their bodies and hung them on the wall of Bet Shean. And so the ancient city of Bet Shean, you'll see one of the first pictures here. You're looking at the city, and it's kind of a mound on top of that was the old city up there. The Romans built down below, and it built a huge Roman city with a amphitheater, all sorts of bathhouses. There is a picture in here of a functional bathroom from the Roman time period, marble slabs. It's interesting.
And lots of them, like 20 people at a time would use the bathroom, and then they have a stage in front of it for entertainment. So you can't take your phone to the bathroom. So there was entertainment while you used the bathroom. So yeah, it was interesting. We teased all the time about if we were, walking down like to where they would get water or anything like that, where we would say something like, "Oh, if you couldn't do this job, you had to be the bathroom dancer." So anyway.
But they had in Bet Shean, they had a fully functioning sewer system running water and sewer through the whole city.
And bathhouses that had saunas and cold rooms and hot rooms. It's pretty impressive.
So it's an interesting place. And then Herodium is another one of Herod's palaces. That's where he was buried. And what's interesting about the Herodium is he decided where to build it, and he wanted to be able to see Jerusalem, and it wasn't high enough. So he just said, "Hey, build a mountain here." And they actually built a mountain to build it higher. So, our guides, like when Jesus was talking about, if you have the faith enough to the mustard seed to move a mountain, they're like, yeah, we saw Herod move a mountain. That was part of it, but it's pretty impressive. And then Caesarea Maritima, that's on the Mediterranean, another one of Herod's palaces. He had swimming pools at all of them too. Huge swimming pools. Herod loved swimming pools. This would have been the place where Paul ended up appearing before Felix, the governor, on trial. They had a hippodrome for horse racing. They had an amphitheater there. It's on the Mediterranean. It's beautiful as well. So these are all national parks, and their national park system, we've mentioned it several times. It's incredible. So they do a really good job.
There's a few, if you come up here, the rocks up here, not the sea salt crystals, the rocks and the sea glass are from the Mediterranean. So that's from Caesarea Maritima.
You stole them?
I stole them. This is the city of David, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So City of David is, this is kind of a newer park there in Israel that they're working on and developing. It's in the location of the ancient City of David. They're doing an excavation now they think is actually David's palace. And so that's an active archaeological dig right now. The really cool thing about this, though, and it was probably one of our favorite things, was Hezekiah's tunnel. Have any of y'all heard of Hezekiah's tunnel? Okay. This was built around 700 BC. King Hezekiah dug through underneath the city of David, old Jerusalem there, to connect the Gihon spring out to a pool where people could gather water. And it's the Siloam pool that Jesus talks about. It's about 2,000 feet underground. I mean, it's 2,000 feet long. It's underground. They dug this thing out from two different directions and met within just a few inches. Absolutely incredible. It's still flowing water today. And you can go and walk through Hezekiah's tunnel with water flowing. So you walk in like water up to your knees.
It's about 3/4 of a mile long.
Yeah.
From start to
So
finish.
there's two Bible verses here. In 2 Kings, it says, "As for the other events of Hezekiah's reign, all of his achievements and how he made the pool and the tunnel by which he brought water into the city." So that mentions it. And then in 2 Chronicles, it was Hezekiah who blocked the upper outlet of the Gihon spring and channeled the water down to the west side of the city of David. And the Gihon spring was the high place in the city where Solomon was anointed king. So many things happened there too, and now it's kind of way down. It's actually underground now with the way it's been built up, but it's just interesting when you see this. And so you'll get to see some pictures of the city of David and the archaeological dig they're doing there. And so this. And so there's a gate here, and I didn't have a real good picture of it, but I wanted to show it to you. This is kind of, gates in ancient Israel were very important. It's how you protected your city. It's where you collected taxes. Lots went on in the city gate. They had, most cities had a rear gate that you could take stuff out. And so, but they didn't want you bringing stuff in. And so, like when you brought in, they would bring in a camels, with all the stuff into the city. They wanted them to go to the main gate. Well, so they built this back gate, and it's really windy and it's very narrow, and it kind of goes to a point, gets super narrow where camels can't go in it. This was called the Eye of the Needle. So that's just what's kind of neat there. So when Jesus is talking about it's easier, rich person not being able to enter, it's like a camel going through the eye of the needle. It's not just metaphorical. There's meaning behind it. And so that's actually that gate in Megiddo was called the Eye of the Needle. So I thought that was pretty neat. Megiddo is one of those cities, I said it's on a giant tail, so it's multiple levels, and they're excavating down different layers. And it was another one that had a tunnel going to water. We got to hike underground in that one. So, lessons learned. Few things here. It's a complicated region. Just the interaction between Muslims, Christians, Jews. I will say people got along much better than I thought they would. Much better than you think they do if you watch the news. Right? I think anything else, it makes you realize that sometimes we don't get the full picture. for the most part, they coexist very well. It's the kind of the radical groups on each side that cause issues. But it's complicated, and I don't know. I mean, the way to peace going forward, I have no idea what it's going to be, and I don't think anybody does, because it's.
I don't know. So many times I would say, but that doesn't make sense. That's so confusing. When I would hear, we would talk about the West Bank or how things work. It is very confusing and, like you said, complicated. And there's not one solution like, oh, Israel's perfect and they need to have all the land back, or Palestine's all evil. There's both. It's like anything. There's evil on both sides. There's evil, in all of us. So there's no perfect solution to any of that. So he's right. It's very complicated.
Mm-hmm. Which leads me to, they need Jesus. I guess one of the overwhelming feelings I got the whole time I was there, just everywhere we went, is people need Jesus. I just felt like, I don't know, how would you say, I think it's easy to worship created things instead of our creator God. I think that's what I saw a lot. People worship created things. They worshiped altars and churches and spaces and rocks and idols, and you just didn't see Jesus much in all of that. And so, in a surprising way, I mean, we're sitting there thinking, this is where this happened and this happened. You're having all those revelations, and then you just look around though, and you're like, people need Jesus. I just kept having that feeling there. I know it's cliche, but it does change how you read Scripture. And I think I mentioned it earlier. Now, like, I've been the world's worst just to skip over all the long list of places and like, oh, well, But now I'm like, okay, where is that? Is that in Galilee, or is that down here, or is that in this area, or is that in the wilderness? Or it gives you a appreciation for how everything tied together. So what would you say about that?
Yeah, because it does sound cliche to say that, but absolutely it does. Even this morning at Bible study, we were reading something. We read one scripture passage, and I was like, "Oh, I know where that's at." Like I remembered, it's just really cool to think about. The stories really come to life when you see the places they happened, and think that's really like the Sea of Galilee. I think for that was probably the most impressive as far as thinking this is really where Jesus walked on the water and where he called the disciples, out. They were really fishing there, and he walked out and called them. So I don't know. It's just it makes it come to life.
So I put on here one of the lessons. We're already wanting to go back, and it's going to take a while, but I think it's so much more fun when you go with people and people you're connected to. And so if any of you have if this is kind of giving you some an inspiration, hey, I want to go. There's nothing stopping us from doing a trip. I mean, it would take probably a couple years to get something lined up and get it where we're ready to go back. But if there's enough interest, I think we could make it happen. It's not an inexpensive trip. There's 10-day trips. There's 12-day trips. We did a 12-day trip, depending on. You'll see trips going anywhere from $3,500 a person up to $5,000 a person, but that's kind of all encompassing. So this is to give you an idea of what you'll need to save up. It's like I said, it's not cheap, but it's kind of a once in a lifetime thing too. But there's just so much you're overwhelmed sometimes the first time you go, I think. So
A lot of people say you need to go back just because you can go back and say, oh, you can kind of relax as far as trying to take it all in and really enjoy it more. So, yeah.
And it was great. And so the pastor that baptized me there, he's been kind of a mentor of mine it was Alan Jesse, who's pastor of Highlands Fellowship in Abingdon, and he actually helped us get Cornerstone started. I don't know if we have any of our original Cornerstone folk here. Back when Cornerstone first started, he was the pastor that kind of took us under his wing and helped us get the church established. And so a lot of connections there. I've known him for years, and he's been a mentor. So that was special, and so.
Yeah, and then Mike was able to baptize me, and I was hesitant. I'll just be honest. I was raised so Baptist that you're baptized one time, you don't have to be baptized again. And I think someone what we were talking about before, explained it as, baptism is a symbol, just like, your wedding ring, then people renew their vows. So it can be kind of like that. So that really, I guess, cleared that up to where I felt like, and I'm really, really glad I did that, because it was just special to have Mike baptize me. So that was neat.
Yeah, we've got videos of it.
Yeah.
So anyway, there are multiple different tour groups you can go with, and I think it is. If it's something that you're really interested in, let us know, and we'll start talking about it. Q&A. One more thing I kind of want to, before we do that, if this got you interested in learning more, we've got a service we use here at Cornerstone, and anyone here is more than welcome to use it, called Right Now Media. It's kind of like, I would call it, the best way to explain it, it's like Netflix for Bible study videos. And so if you go to our website, mycornerstone.org/rightnow, there's a link there to click on. It'll take you, let you sign up for it. There's an app on your phone. There's an app for Apple TV or Roku or whatever. You can watch it on your computer to go to a website. But there's all these videos. And these are just the videos on Right Now Media that are really good. Journey with Jesus is Pastor Tony Evans. We actually went and watched that movie in the movie theater in Christiansburg.
And now it's on
It's him, Tony Evans, and Priscilla Shirer going through Israel.
It's so good.
And going through a lot of the same
There's a book
sites.
up here too.
Yeah, that book goes along with it.
That goes along with that. But yeah, it's really, really good.
So that's on there. 7 Days in the Holy Land, Franklin Graham. So that's a good one. And he actually has another one called Return to the Holy Land. So there's two with him in it. Walking with Jesus is like a small group study that we're actually going to do as a church this fall. I'm going to do a sermon series kind of based on our trip, and I actually filmed some sermon segments there. So we'll do that in August or September. But Walking with Jesus is a really good small group curriculum that you can use. There's another one. There's two by Appian Media, which is on Right Now Media too, called Following the Messiah and Searching for a King. The Searching for a King is kind of the story of David and Saul. And then Following the Messiah is all about Jesus. So those are really, really high quality videos. And then obviously the Bible.
I thought you were going to say there's like one called the Bible. I'm like, wow. But you mean like your
No, I mean, I hope this inspires you to get in the Word more. I mean, that's kind of the goal. So has this been helpful? Okay. Good. So it's,
You're welcome.
It went a little long. I knew it would.
We knew. We had a lot. There's so much that you feel like you can't leave things. And we still left so much out. There's still so much more, but.
Yeah, I didn't show pictures from everywhere we went, so.
Right. Any last minute questions?
No, I wanted to say thank you for sharing.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you for sitting and listening to it for an hour, 2 hours. And
Listening to my music choices.
Huh?
If there's anything that you would change about the trip, looking back on it now, what would it be? Spend more time somewhere or see something you didn't see?
That's a good question.
I wish we could have gone to the Temple Mount, up on the mount, but we couldn't because of Ramadan.
Yeah, typically you can, but we weren't allowed to go up there because during Ramadan there's so many Muslims there, and it's just kind of like
And
they
the-
reserve it for them.
And there were a lot of clashes that week we were there.
Yeah.
So
Gosh.
I think, I studied a lot before I went, but now looking back, I'm like, I really didn't study enough. And I think you're always going to feel that way, though. I wanted, yeah.
Yeah, I felt like that too because it's so overwhelming to try to learn so much before you go. And I don't know that you can. Like you said, I think you're going to feel like you've not studied enough regardless of how much you study. So maybe trying to research where we're going. But it's almost better to just do it when you get back, and that way you can say, oh, I remember that. I remember seeing that. So.
And our itinerary did change while we were there. Like we went different places, different days, and based on what was available and what we could do, couldn't do. So you got to be a little flexible even when you're there. So
If you were vacationing, staying at the Dead Sea would have been nice another night because it was such a nice little resort-ish area. But you kind of got to move on and get your.
we weren't able to go to Nablus and some other places in the West Bank, Shiloh area, and some of those places that I would have liked to go, but they just said it wasn't safe at the time we were there. So there are a lot of Old Testament things happened in the West Bank area. So we weren't able to do as much there as I wanted to.
I think it's so ironic and very sad that the Jewish people, many of them, have not accepted Christ as their Savior, and they're right there with all the history and the reality.
Yep, it is. That's very eye-opening. When you go, you saw the pictures of the Western Wall, and I'm sure you've seen that on all kinds of things. But yeah, to see them, some of those men that stand there, they nod their head and do all that. They do it all day long, all day long. That's what, and the government even pays some of them to go and pray on behalf of the nation of Israel, to just over and over. So it's very sad because there's such a disconnect there. You're like, that's not what it's supposed to be. So. And you couldn't see that, but the men go to a different section of the Wailing Wall than the women. So there wasn't a lot of pictures of the women there, but yeah.
You showed us pictures of the golden menorah that had been built, and you mentioned the people that were preparing the ritual sacrifice and all for the temple that will be rebuilt. Did you see any other signs of the temple?
Not really. And our guide even said, he said, that's a fringe group. He's like,
They're out there a little bit
But-
because they have an entire
the
institute.
Temple Institute. If you can look them up. But I mean, then there's different levels of, I don't know, even in the Jewish faith. I mean, you've got your ultra Orthodox and your different levels of what they believe. But with that, I don't know. I mean, that's a good question. And there's a big battle in archaeology versus the minimalists versus the what are they called? Minimalists versus the
I don't remember.
kind of more the traditionalist, I guess. But on how much do you use the Bible when you're doing archaeology, right? And so there's even battles in that. Like you have and one of the things you'll see is in Israel, Tel Aviv is more of a secular city, where Jerusalem is more of a religious city. But there's a lot going on, I think, that we don't know about.
They have synagogues throughout the country now that are active.
They do, yeah.
Oh yeah, and when we were at Masada, is that where it was? There was probably 100 middle school Jewish boys on a school trip, so that didn't smell great. Middle school boys smell when they sweat. So.
And they had to hike up. They didn't get to ride the cable car.
Yeah, they did. They made them. Did they all hike up or down?
Both.
Both. Yeah, I felt sorry for their teachers. I'm sure they're like, let's get this energy out, make them walk. But yeah. So there's a lot of, you see a lot of practicing Jews and I'm sure they were probably part of a Jewish school that they went to.
Our flight back to New York was a lot of
Yeah, it was probably
Jewish rabbis on it.
30-40% of the flight was Jewish people flying to New York. So
Seeing all this stonework and everything reminded me of the city of Petra.
Yeah, and we weren't far from that. I wish we could have seen that too.
Yeah.
That's just in the country of Jordan.
And I said, we just need to go to Petra.
Yeah,
That's where everything's gonna be happening.
and that's in the country of Jordan, which is just right across from there.
anybody got questions?
What about the currency? Are they taking US dollars, credit cards? Did you have to do currency exchange?
No.
No, it was easy. Yeah,
They take
took
American.
U.S. We did, a couple places would make us take shekels back. They wouldn't give us change in U.S. dollars, but you can also use your credit card. It was really funny. I had one card that doesn't tap. You have to insert it. And they didn't like, they're like, this is so, one of them said, oh, this is like, let's go back in time and insert it. Like, So,
They were
yeah.
making fun of them.
Yeah,
because
making
it
fun
couldn't
of my
tap.
card because it wouldn't tap. So, yeah,
They're more advanced than we are.
right.
Sometimes.
And I think that's a misconception. It's not like if you've been on a mission trip and you go to Nicaragua, this is nothing like that. You're going to a very technologically advanced country that's, very nice. I mean, you don't have to worry about what you eat or drink or things like you do when you go to Nicaragua. I mean, it's a very, very much like here. So the roads are a lot better than our roads. The airport was super nice, very nice airport. And the people were extra nice in the airport. I'm like, what is this? Like, you go to the airport here and it's like everybody's mad and in a bad mood, but they were really nice.
They do security different in airports. They interview each group coming in and out. And so they interview the group leader and ask them all sorts of questions, making sure they know everybody on the, and like how, and then they pick somebody at random from your group and ask them the same questions, make sure they match.
Guess who the random person was? He got picked.
They asked me like where we went on the whole trip, like every day, where we went, where we stayed, who our bus driver was, what our,
Yeah. He told me, so now if they ask you, don't give too much information because he knows how I am. I'll be like, yeah, and our bus driver's name was, and he was so cute. He has 3 kids. But anyway. Anybody? I know it's getting late, but.